To go to how do you start it from beginning?
In November 1992, it was the first anniversary of my mother's death. After work I have to walk about a quarter of a mile from the British rail station to the car park. The most direct route is down a narrow, well-lit alley, which leads to a flight of wooden stairs down to the beginning of the car park. As I descended the stairs and started to walk along the first section of the car park, one of the sodium streetlights illuminating the area winked out.
Can you hear me, Caroline?
Yes, it's fine.
The same light went out on the next 4 evenings, going out at a greater distance each time. The last 2 or 3 times seemingly coincided with me thinking about it going out. I did not wait for the light to restrike. Each time I left it in an extinguished state, and after 5 days the S.L.I effect stopped as suddenly as it started. Although nothing about the weather, time of day, or temperature had changed that dramatically, that I can recall.
Could you all hear that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
You heard the account, yeah?
Yes, we did.
Okay, the streetlight enigma. From the very early days of ASSAP to the modern day, let's talk about streetlights, S.L.I and S.L.I, and all of the things that go with them, and why this has been such an important part of ASSAP's journey. Thank you. Right, first slide. Tonight I'm going to be discussing an effect known as slide, talking about what is slide, Dr. Hilary Evans and ASSAP, the slide database, explanations for S.L.I, and is S.L.I psi. But before we go that far, I'm going to start by playing some accounts.
My experience of S.L.I started in 1991 when I was 19. I was walking back from my girlfriend's house after a night out followed by a smooching session at her house. It was summertime in the small hours of the morning and quite cold. I was walking through an open park lit by old-fashioned ornate streetlights when the nearest light post to the footpath went out as I approached. I thought nothing of it except the bulb had gone. The very same thing happened the following night. And again I dismissed it as a dodgy bulb and thought nothing of it until it happened the next time I passed, at which point I started to think something was up. Over the months, as I returned home from my girlfriend's house, the light would always do the opposite as to its original state, i.e. if it was off, it would turn on and vice versa. After passing the light post, it would usually revert to its original state.
The reason I'm so very interested is because I myself have a lot of various phenomena around me. Street lights diffuse and go off at night, sometimes very slowly, sometimes very quickly. Street lights go on in the full sunshine at times when I come close to them.
My experience of S.L.I started in 1991 when I was 19. I was walking back from my girlfriend's house after a night out followed by a smooching session at her house.
Oh, sorry.
It was summertime in the small hours of the morning and quite cold. I was walking through an open park lit by old-fashioned ornate streetlights when the nearest light post to the footpath went out as I approached.
We had that one twice by mistake, but never mind.
If I am on real high energy, which I am about half the time, I can hold a compass and the needle will go crazy and just go round and around until I let go of the compass. I also periodically have tremendous amount of trouble with my handheld tape recorder. It will stop recording, but it's still capable to play back. I went through about 10 of them over a period of a couple of months. Once it was so bad, it even wiped out what was on the tape. At other times, several of the fuses and the lights in my car will blow. Once I was really excited. I was in my travel trailer at the time, and when I reached out to turn on a light, There was like blue lightning running through the little bulbs, 2 of them, and a fuse blew, and all the DC lights in the trailer went out. I also can get very charged with static electricity, so much so that sparks actually fly around me, and if anyone else is close by, the sparks will connect with them. I used to have the same sort of problem with an IBM copying machine, and they had to spray the floor with anti-static stuff to keep it from happening. Like everybody else, I have no control over it. It would be quite spectacular if we could, don't you think?
Thank you. I seem to be having problems with my video. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And you could hear the narrative accounts, yeah?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Tell me if there's a problem with the sound, please, because I'm trying not to. Right, let's move on. So hopefully that's answered the question.
My experience of S.L.I started in 1991 when I was 19.
Okay, let me try and how to get the next slide. Here we go. Next slide.
I thought nothing of it over 100 metres from it when it did this. On the approach, it would vary from 60 metres to 10 metres past the post before it would turn on or off.
Okay.
I have had periods in my life when several appliances I myself have a lot one after the other compass and regular light bulbs. Streetlights also just go round and around. Sometimes I go either in people's homes or in restaurants. Periodically have tremendous amount of trouble with my
Oh, for goodness sake. Right, next. Sorry about that.
Shut me up, can you?
Here we go. What is slide? One more account.
The first possible S.L.I occurred when I was in an extremely emotional state while I was driving to a police station. I was very worried about a loved one and spontaneously asked, "Just give me a sign that she will be okay." At that instant, a streetlight over the car burned out. Everything turned out okay. I'm not sure who it was that I was asking for a sign.
So streetlight interference is quite simply the effect by which a human being seems to have an effect on an inanimate object, namely a street lamp. And street lamps are actually ideal for a subject of study because they're public, they're either on or off, there's no question of being almost right, and we know quite a lot about them. And they are clearly not designed to be affected by human emotions or human thought. So can humans actually interfere with inanimate objects? Well, this is a major subject of study in parapsychology, as I'm sure you all know. But is there a simpler explanation? Well, back in the late 80s, early 90s, ASSAP became heavily involved with this. To understand what comes next, you really need to know a little bit of history. In 1981, the SPR had become very excited by the Ganzfeld experiments of Bob Honiton and others. Honiton and others. And there was a new Kostler Chair of Parapsychology founded at Edinburgh University. And what I call the New British Parapsychology, because it roughly coincides with the new British wave of heavy metal came about, which was experimentally based and saw arguments between people like Carl Sargent and Susan Blackmore at Cambridge and Bristol respectively, but also under Morris Morris took the professorship up at Bob Morris took the professorship up at Edinburgh, huge amounts of work on the Ganzfeld. And the Ganzfeld seemed to suggest that it was possible for human beings to sense or see at a distance. It was evidence for clairvoyance or ESP. At that time, a bunch of mavericks within the SPR had become dissatisfied with the new experimental and statistical emphasis and the loss of interest in the what we might call superstar cases, or the spontaneous cases, the ghosts, the poltergeists, the overt phenomena. And rather than allow the whole of psychical research to go the way of statistics and lab research, they decided to proceed on their own way. And there were other issues within the SPR at the time which caused them to leave and form a new organisation called ASSAP. And so ASSAP is the child of the SPR, but our relationships have not always been as good or cordial as they are today, I think it's fair to say.
The first possible
In 1981, the ASSAP was set up, and one of the founders was a chap called Hilary Evans. And he became very interested by the late 80s in a phenomena called streetlight interference. Now, in the early days of ASSAP, we did a lot of stuff which hasn't been looked at much since. We looked at psychic questing, we had a conference on that, we looked at crop circles, which I think have been fairly heavily debunked, we looked at ufology, we looked at all kinds of different phenomena. Earth mysteries and ley lines came under our remit. So many things that we no longer actually deal with. And I think a lot has been lost because I personally like a broad Fortean approach. But history changes and fashions change in the paranormal as with anything else. So in the 80s, streetlight interference first began to attract attention in the United States with an article published in Omni. And some people immediately responded on seeing it with a sense of, hang on, that happens to me. And once ASSAP took up the cause of investigating whether or not humans were involved, it became much more interesting. Streetlight interference, sometimes called high voltage syndrome, is the claimed ability of individuals to turn streetlights or outside building lights on or off when passing near them. That was Mark Pilkington writing in The Guardian in the days when ASSAP's work received a lot more attention than nowadays. Nowadays, we get published in the Norwich Evening Gazette, and they quote me as saying, the mystery light, it was fairies, you know, clearly fairies. So being misquoted by the press is an occupational hazard. Anyway, let's play another narrative.
This seemed to be a very regular occurrence. I think at first I noticed this because I lived on a tree-lined avenue which links the Leicester University to the town centre. In between these trees were Victorian lights. I am not sure whether these were original, but I could quite believe they were. Certainly the avenue was extremely old, even given its name, New Walk. In the evening, when I was going to and from the town centre, at least 3 of the lights would switch off as I approached, and would then relight once I had walked past. It was quite noticeable, because although the lights lined the whole avenue, it was always the same 3 that were affected. I did not pay too much significance to this, and certainly would not have put it down to paranormal activity. I simply explained it away as very similar to incidents which used to occur whilst I was wearing a watch that would stop working if I wore it for a while. If I took the watch off, it would function as normal.
Okay, thank you very much to Christian for recording that one. The chap was from Leicester, so... Who was Dr. Hilary Evans? Well, very briefly, because some of you knew him well, I'm sure. I knew him of the slightest, but here's Dr. Hilary Evans and his beloved wife Mary. And in 1964, he created what went on to become the Mary Evans Picture Library. Now, we have a wonderful relationship with them, by which a picture library is a special kind of archive that owns the rights to photographs and illustrations. And what they do for us is they allow us to use them without cost. And it's very, very expensive to license a photograph or an image. But as the Mary Evans Picture Library has almost every paranormal image of importance, it seems, ASSAP are in a very privileged position. And we try not to call upon their services more than we have to. But that's how we're able to produce such beautiful issues of Seriously Strange. And Dr. Hilary Evans and Mary Evans, the picture library was a major part of their life, and it's still going on today. Their daughter is a director, and she's been very gracious to us over the years. And Hilary's books have been passed over to Norrköping, to the UFO archive over in Sweden. So, let's move on. Oh. Hang on. Previous. I can't see one of my things, but never mind. What is slide? Let's carry on a bit.
A friend and myself were talking about my ability to put out lights. He didn't believe me, so I concentrated, but nothing was happening. As soon as I gave up, 7 or 8 in a row went out.
So Slide was a project created through ASSAP by Dr. Hilary Evans, who was a very distinguished gentleman, as you probably gathered, in 1990. And it stands for, although the ability to interfere with streetlights, people who can do it are referred to as sliders, and the actual streetlight interference effect is called S.L.I. And at times we've all wondered if it was a joke on Psy and if there was anything actually to it and if Hilary took it seriously, but I'm afraid he actually absolutely did, as becomes clear when you read his book. What is SLIDE? Well, in this case it stands for Streetlight Interference Data Exchange. And Hilary provided a way in which people could record these bizarre but very public experiences. I mean, recording ghost stories is something that the SPR and ASSAP have always done. Recording UFO sightings, again, we send out investigators. But people who can turn lights on and off at will, or even not at will, even by just being close, or sabotage checkouts or their work computers, they're really interesting. And there wasn't much research being done into that effect at the time. So he created the Streetlight Interference Data Exchange. And the Streetlight Interference Data Exchange, what it was simply a repository of people's experiences. And they appear in a couple of books. Right. Talking of which, let's move on to the next one.
A friend and myself.
Next. There we go. And Hilary was a great author. Harlots, Whores and Hookers, A History of Prostitution was his first book that was actually largely, as far as I can see, an excuse for him to show off 18th and 19th century woodcuts. And those woodcuts and drawings and illustrations were used to good effect. And that was, at the very beginning, it was just an attempt to use material from the Mary Evans picture library, I sometimes think. Intrusion, Society and the Paranormal. And then in the 80s, under Hugh Pincott's editorship, we then started an entire line of ASSAP books called The Evidence For. Whoops, previous. Now, if you're actually in receipt of a good wage and you have money and time to read, if you look for The Evidence For by Aquarian Press, those books were superb at the time. Now, obviously, they're somewhat outdated at the moment. Robert Moore has just finished what will be called the ASSAP UFO Handbook for 2022. And that will be made available to members later this year, hopefully. We'll be selling it. It will be published by ASSAP, and it will cover the latest in ufology from Rob's own perspective. But it will also have hints for investigation and all kinds of other good stuff in it. I think Dave Sivia, have you seen a copy of it, Dave? David Sivia, is he there? Oh well. Visions, Apparitions, Alien Visitors is another superb book. God, Spirits, Cosmic Guardians. Hilary takes a very, very, Dr. Evans, perhaps I should call him, takes a very, very, very Fortean approach. One measures a circle beginning anywhere. And his last book, published in 2010 after his death, was, I believe it was after his death, was The Enigma of Streetlight Interference, which is a book which, obviously, if you're interested in tonight's topic, you'll want to read. One of the problems with reading it is brilliantly thought through and extremely densely written. It has, which doesn't mean it's unreadable, it's extremely readable, but he deals with so many profound and important questions that you're left for not being able to see the wood for the trees at time and wondering, well, what is really going on here? And one of the things he discovered from the S.L.I database was there were no simple patterns. Human emotion seemed to be involved in some way, but some people were in cars, some people could do it at will, the type of street lamp changed, the weather changed, the temperature changed. There were people from all walks of life, from all over the world, male and female are fairly evenly represented. It was very difficult to actually see any kind of patterns emerging from the data. And for that reason, obviously, my answer is always find more data. We'll get to that in a minute. Next up. If there's one book of Hilary Evans that I think is really important for ASSAP members, given our strong emphasis on hauntings over the years and ghosts, and one book that I personally find exceptionally useful, and I have read pretty much all of the serious academic literature on hauntings that's available, I think. That's not an idle boast. I actually spent 3 or 4 years of my life doing it when Beck was doing it as well for a PhD, and I was able to acquire a lot of the books from her and read through it. And during that time, the book that I think was the most helpful and the most useful and the most well thought through is this one, Seeing Ghosts, Experiences of the Paranormal by Hilary Evans, which is in the tradition of Tyrrell's Apparitions and books like that, which draw on the sense of hallucinations. What Evans does is he looks at actual cases of when people sees ghosts and then applies his incisive and incredible intelligence to working out what actually is happening. So if you've got a bit of money and you pop onto amazon.co.uk, it's probably available on Kindle. You can almost certainly pick up copies from a Libris or other booksellers second hand. You might be able to order it from a local bookshop, but I do recommend this book, which is why And it's for some reason not listed on his Wikipedia page. And he wrote so many books, I'm not really surprised. But this is the one that I recommend ASSAP members to get. If you've got any other recommendations, raise them at the end. Okay. The slide database. Now, all of the cases that I've had voiced for you tonight come from the slide database. Let's have another one.
Having a mathematical background, MA Cambridge, I concluded that it was massively unlikely that my S.L.I, which occurred fairly regularly while I was walking across Barnes Common in southwest London, to have occurred by chance, especially as I was always the same distance, 5 metres or so, from the light when it failed. I couldn't believe this was typical of the failure rates of lights at all. I thought about the possibility of me shaking loose a connection, etc., and eventually concluded that I must be emitting some sort of aura, possibly electromagnetic radiation. Having studied physics, I could see how a gas discharge tube light could have failed due to some sort of electromagnetic radiation interference, if the arc was only just powerful enough to light the light.
That was Chris Killey, who was actually a mathematician. So let's move on. Types of streetlight. There are a bewildering number of types of streetlight, as I discovered when I tried to investigate this. And one of my first thoughts was to call a council. In Cheltenham, we're currently seeing more and more LED streetlights, which are being put out across the country. And they're controversial because the light they emit on the blue spectrum frequencies have the effect, apparently, of keeping people awake at night, which is why you get blue light filters on your mobile phone. If you're not aware of that, if you've got a modern phone, pull down the controls and look for a blue light filter. It doesn't turn the blue off, it just turns some of the wavelengths off. So if you're prone to looking at your phone last thing at night, you're able to actually get some sleep afterwards. So blue light filters are missing on the first generation of LED lights, and there was some controversy as to whether there were health risks, because certain areas in Spain where they were first introduced saw an increase in cancer, but I think there's very little real. It's very hard. It might be a case of correlation not being cause. The second type, which we often see in Britain, are sodium lights, and high sodium are more yellow, low sodium are more orangey yellow. There are some that are the bottom left hand picture. You tend to see them along expressways or bypasses or whatever you want to call them, ring roads, out of town roads. They produce less light pollution, as do modern LED lights, than some, but they are still fairly bright. The filament light is unusually uncommon. We see filament lights in most old style light bulbs within the house. You're all familiar with the classic light bulb with the metal filament that heats up. You don't see that very much nowadays in street lighting. Bottom right hand corner, we still have these in Glasgow, Edinburgh and around the country in different places. Fluorescent tubes, we're probably all familiar with these from our own homes. And at the top right, that's mercury vapour. And you notice this kind of greenish tinge to it. So sodium orange or yellow, LED bright white or blue white, mercury blue or blue green with a greenish blue tinge. Fluorescents tend to diffuse and cause a glow around them. And halogen, you find halogen lamps, they're extremely bright, they tend to be used in sports grounds, etc. Filament lights nowadays are mainly used in limited places. Some of the older household security lighting is filament bulbs. So, types of streetlights. I'm not an engineer, so if I'm totally wrong, you'll just have to forgive me, but this is what I've been told, having spent some time researching it. So, explanations. If it's not a paranormal effect, what is it? Well, let's have a look at them. Firstly, do not die. I thought this was subtle. I hope you can... Oh, sorry. I hope you can... Previous. I hope you see this and pay attention. Streetlights are surprisingly high voltage, far more so than you would expect. And there have been cases of investigators who have gone to investigate streetlights that are faulty, touched them, and received fatal electric shocks. Also, not parapsychological investigators, but electricians who knew what they were doing. Also, on occasions, even the ground around them can have a very high potential if a street lamp is faulty. So, in the event that you find a faulty street light and it is clear that it is defective in some way, do not approach it lest it arc and kill you, because ASSAP are not responsible if you die. On the other hand, if you do kill yourself investigating a streetlight, I would be greatly, greatly, greatly honoured if you would be so good as to haunt me, on the grounds that would really help with other lines of our research. So if you are intent on killing yourself on street lamps, please contact us first and leave some kind of communication phrase so that we can test our mediums on you. Thank you. This warning was brought to our attention not by Hilary, who doesn't seem to mention it in his book, but by Gary M. Rowe, spelled R-O-W-E, who I would love to make touch with, who did a lot of the definitive early ASSAP research from the electrical engineering basis into street lamps. Okay, the guy on the right, many of you will recognise, it's Richard Wiseman. Richard Wiseman is a notorious skeptic, and in his book Paranormality, he takes the mick out of streetlight interference, and he says, well, what I've done is I've looked at the number of streetlights there are in the world. I can't remember what it is, but he works it out. I've worked out how many street lamps there probably are, and I've worked out how many people there are, and I've divided people by street lamps, and obviously he's taken into account, one assumes, the fact that large areas of the world don't have street lamps, so he's probably just gone for the areas that do. And he says we spend so many seconds a day. If we spend 3 seconds every time we walk under a street lamp, and we walk under 15 street lamps a day, well, that's 45 seconds, isn't it? Blah, blah, blah. And he does the maths. And he says that in our life, we spend quite a lot of time walking under street lights. And obviously that depends. If you live on the North Yorkshire moors, it's less likely than if you live in London. But lights are something we all interact with all the time. And given that a large number of lights at any time are likely to be coming towards the end of their life or about to die, his argument is it's a simple statistical chance. The problem with this argument is that if it was the case, we would expect single streetlights to be affected, and we would expect S.L.I to occur to us all on an even basis. Now, I can't actually remember a time it ever happened to me on my own. But my dad, every night when he took the dog for a walk, he would go to the streetlight on Mitchell Avenue outside our house in Bury St Edmunds, and as they approached, the streetlight would go out. And so me and my mother, obviously, being us, would go galumphing up and down the street, but we couldn't get the same effect. Why? Well, he said, and his argument was, that the wires to the streetlights run to a central post underground, which is where they're powered from, and that the wire was therefore loose, and that as he walked along, something about his footfall caused underground tremors and caused the wire to come loose, and that was hence the haunted lamppost. However, if it was a supernatural effect or paranormal effect, I didn't inherit it. So this is the second option, and it is the case that, in fact, usually they're actually not done in serial or parallel. They're done, each one has its own wire from the power supply. So it could simply be that a loose wire underground is somehow vibrated or tremors from you walking. It causes the wire to wobble, and because of the pole height, the higher the pole which the light is on, that would amplify the vibration, and that might be enough, might be sufficient to turn the street lamp off. Now the problem with that is that you'd have to be, it would be the same for pretty much everybody of the same weight and the same gait. So if there is a street light and every time somebody approaches it, then absolutely this is the explanation. But this doesn't seem to be the explanation for some of the cases that we've been looking at from the streetlight interference data exchange. Also, it would normally only take out one light at a time, and many of the cases we actually see are sequential. Another possibility, just before we go into this, another story My brother-in-law Richard, who died last year back in February of lung cancer, he was walking home from the Westow Country Club up to his house in Flempton, which is about a mile through the Suffolk countryside. But there are streetlights all the way along the road, and it's a dark road. And as he walked home from the pub, he approached a streetlight and it went out. And he approached the next streetlight and it went out, but the one behind him came back on. So he waited for a moment, getting a bit freaked out, and everything was all right. Went forward, and the next one went off. And as he sped up until he was almost running, they started to go off in sequence, and he was terrified by it. He thought it was actually something supernatural, paranormal. Okay, obscuring alternatives. That's a bad Japan joke for those who don't know. It doesn't matter. On the top of streetlights, there's a light sensor, which is used on some streetlights, which is used to time their turning on and off. Rather than have a clock, like many do, these work by actually simply detecting the presence of daylight. So when it's daylight, they turn off. So one way of turning off a street lamp is to have a bird land on it, or leaves, or muck, or something that obscures the sensor. Hang on, wrong way round. Sorry, this is to turn it off. If you obscure it, it's the other way round. Ignore what I've written underneath. If you obscure it, you will actually cause the light to come on. Yeah, that's right, yeah. So the light comes on. So that will turn on a street lamp. The other alternative is light sources. It's been suggested that headlights that are wrongly set, so they point too high, passing aircraft, reflections, security lights, a host of other light sources in the environment can hit the sensor, which thinks it's daylight and therefore turns off. So if you're driving down a road and every street light you go past pretty much is turned off, that might very well be caused by headlights. The problem with this hypothesis is A, streetlights turn themselves off when people are on foot as well, or on bicycles, and B, if your headlights are set so high that they're hitting the sensors, which are generally obscured because they're on top of the lamppost, on the very top of the light itself, then I think you're also going to be dazzling low-flying aircraft and being a menace to drivers. I don't think it's a particularly good explanation, but it's one that's often put forwards. Clocks. Many older lamp posts lights have clocks within that are designed to turn them on and off at a specific time. And as such, they can be set wrongly, so they're simply turning on and off at exactly the time you walk back from your girlfriend's. They can be subject to vibrations that knock them out, and there can be a problem with the timing mechanism. So there could be various logical reasons with clocks why the lamppost is susceptible. Voltage fluctuations. Now this is particularly important on sodium and the other gas-based ones. What they do is they produce an electrical arc that ignites the gas, or lights up the gas, I should say, by passing through it. And basically, molten metal forms a gas. The gas then has an electrical discharge pass through it, which then causes a bright glow. So that's the basis of sodium lights, mercury lights, and the others. Now, you have to have the voltage at the right level, and if the voltage goes too high and the temperature gets too hot, they automatically cut out. And if the voltage goes too low, they automatically cut out. So as a result of that, people are very careful to actually set them to have these safeguards. As a result, it could just be that as you walk on the road, they have all reached the same level of whatever it is that's causing the voltage fluctuation, a power spike or something. But obviously, I forget what you call them, the adapters you have to stop spikes do exist on these as well, on street lamps as well. Temperature. Copper wires are very susceptible to temperature fluctuations. Let's have another narrative. Oh, go back. Don't know what that one is. Right, attentional bias. You notice these things more. I googled young couple in love. There you go. And as you can see, he is distracted by a street lamp just up here to the right. Now, what it actually is a good example of attentional bias many people are familiar with. A good example of attentional bias that many people are familiar with is if you fall in love, I wouldn't know about this, but I'm told some people do it, Imagine you're a lady and you fall in love with a chap. If his name is John, you might suddenly notice John, the name, everywhere. If his name is Paul, you might notice the name Paul everywhere. If his name is George, you might notice the name George everywhere. It's not that there's anything supernatural going on. It's simply the fact that you are more aware of that name because suddenly a lot of your thought processes are focused on John, Paul, or George. If the name Ringo constantly comes up, however, you're either a huge Beatles fan or something really weird and psychic's going on. You should talk to me, because that's just wrong. But that's an example of attentional bias. The 23 effect that Robert Anton Wilson was very fond of, if you've ever started to look for the number 23, you will suddenly notice it everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And it's particularly appealing to me for various reasons. But anyway, also, another form of attentional bias might be this simple. Let's listen to an engineer from Austin, Texas. And my friend Deli, who's from Austin, Texas, recorded this for us. Oops.
I think there is a rather mundane explanation for S.L.I. Basically, the lights are cycling off and on, and a few of us have become unconsciously attuned to this behavior. High-intensity discharge lights, such as the high-pressure sodium ones widely used in streetlights, cycle off and on as they near the end of their lives. They can remain off for several minutes while cooling before turning back on, and most people don't even notice the usually subtle effect of a single light turning off or on in their field of vision. However, some people, for whatever reason, notice it the first time and may even see the element still glowing to confirm that a light was on just a moment ago. They then notice it on subsequent occasions, and after a while, some part of their unconscious becomes very adept at noticing it. They, of course, cannot notice a light transitioning when they are not around to see it, and do not notice it when the light is far away, because the effect occupies a much smaller visual arc. It therefore appears to only happen when they come near it. Moreover, the relatively long periods compound the illusion because they assume that the light has simply turned off. These people, myself included, are special due to their awareness of, rather than their effect on, streetlights.
So that's another explanation, attentional bias. So, we've heard some of the logical explanations, but at the end of the day, it's a hard phenomena to actually test. We can experience it, we can be aware of it, and we can think about all kinds of paranormal corollaries. The Angelique Cottin and the magnetic or electric girls of 19th century France and early 20th century America, who were young ladies who seemed to attract objects as if they were magnets or have a peculiar effect on electrical devices. A number of people in the S.L.I database seem to have had strange experiences shortly before they started the phenomena, such as electric shocks, illnesses, or other things. But this could just be an example, as so often happens. Something happens to us and we try and find an explanation as to what is actually happening in terms of something that, we experienced and understand. Is this a psychic power? Well, if it is, it's doing something phenomenal, because these streetlights all have different mechanisms, different systems of wiring, are configured in different ways, and if you can affect an LED streetlight using the same method you use to affect a fluorescent one as the same method you use to affect a sodium one, then whatever the paranormal effect is, it's working in a really different way. Should we take streetlight interference seriously? Absolutely. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Project demonstrated, I think beyond any doubt, that there is an interaction between human consciousness and machines. If you look up PAIR, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, and Robert John and Brenda Dunn's work there, they are no fools. They knew what they were doing, and what they were doing was demonstrating a very small but perceptible effect. Now, the problem with it is that it could be that if psi exists, the power is not evenly distributed. So it could be that I'm absolutely baseline and have almost no psychic power whatsoever, but that Randy or Wendy or Mandy or any of us are incredibly psychic. We have psychic superstars who can do stuff, and then you have the rest of us. It could be that psychic ability is distributed in an inverse bell curve. So 1% of the population has 99% of the psi, which would be really unfair if, as many people have suggested, psi is actually what we call luck. Oh well, some guys have all the luck, as Rod Stewart's saying, I believe. Let's move on from this, and oh, that was it. So a very brief introduction to a very complicated phenomena. Right, okay, I'm going to go back to the main screen and explain what the plan is and where we're going with it next. So I'll stop screen sharing. Come forward so you can see me. Okay, so streetlight interference. Many of us have experienced it. Many of us know that it exists. It seems to exist for us. We seem to be able to do it. So what the hell is it and why does it work? Well, the answer is we don't know. It appears to be an interaction of our consciousness, our mood, with physical objects. I think all those other explanations are just as worthy. So what we need to do is find cases that we can investigate. But unfortunately, investigating streetlights requires trained electrical engineers. Remember the bit I talked about danger of death and faulty streetlights can kill? So what we're going to do is we're going to, ASSAP as an organisation, are going to liaise with people who work professionally in the repair of streetlights, and we're going to try once and for all a final push on the streetlight problem in honour of Hilary Evans. It's been over a decade, and Hilary would have deserves answers, and the founders of ASSAP deserve respect for all that work they did. I noticed that even some of the exec members were one of them in particular pushed back when I said I'm going to take us back into streetlight interference, and said, well, we thought it was a load of rot back at the time. Well, yeah, that may be the case. But if we discard everything that some people think is rot without actually investigating it, then we are not even true skeptics. We're just fools. And whatever I may be, I'm not a fool. Am I going to waste huge amounts of resources on it? No. But I'm going to make a real effort to make one last attempt and to spend money as required. So the first thing I've done is I've set up once again the Streetlight Interference Data Exchange. There will be a form, and I'm going to ask you all to get involved. If you've had these kinds of experiences or you've affected other electrical items, I would ask you to fill in the form, and the form will be available in a moment or two. If you have knowledge of other people who have, or if you'd be willing to share the form and explain what it's about with a few lines on your own on your Facebook and encourage your friends to, or just pass it on, I would really ask you to help if you can. So if you know anyone who has anomalous experiences, or if you're willing to just ask generally, and we're going to see if we can gain new cases. And then what we'll do is we'll use some software to investigate using qualitative analysis and nibbling on homemade pizza, says Christian. Okay, we'll use some software to carry out an analysis, and from that analysis we will be able to tell if the phenomena has changed over the last 20 years. So that is the plan. We are going to attempt to get the S.L.I slide database up and running, and we're going to attempt to get some serious attention, and we're going to liaise with scientists, engineers, physicists and whoever else it takes, and we're going to establish whether there's a real thing or not. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to build some low ampage simple and safe devices. Hang on, let's try and stop my hat disappearing by changing the virtual background. Just turn it off. We all know my bedroom's a mess. There we go. So we are going to attempt to build some small devices that we can take along to future ASSAP conferences and events. And for those of you who have been to an ASSAP conference, you'll be aware that every year we run the Paranormal Olympics, which I actually won one year, making me a star psychic, which proves it's a load of rubbish, really, doesn't it? Because I'm a psychic as a house brick. But we are actually going to do it. We are actually going to try this again. We're going to run the Paranormal Olympics, and we're going to see if people can influence items. Furthermore, if I can find a good subatomic decay source, random radioactive decay source that we can link to, I will create a program that allows us to do random online number generator type experiments like Pear did, and we will run trials to test people for psychic powers. And if any of you are psychic super people, I will probably then try and persuade you to assist in further experiments or dissect you. I mean, no, not dissect you, no. That was a joke, by the way. Probably actually try and get you to try and find my lottery numbers, but we'll get to that later. But seriously, we need to do some work. I think this is taking ASSAP forward. We've made a good start with the webinar. Publications are going well. Website's about to come back online with a new website based on all of the content that Morris has put up over the years and all of his brilliant custodian of the old website, but with a new fresh design. So it's the same content largely, but with a new look. Thanks to Norrie, to Alison and Inska for working on that. And I think it's time for ASSAP to move back, take what was part of our legacy, take Hilary's ideas forward into the 21st century, and so S.L.I database it is. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Caroline, can you handle the questions while I just try and find the link? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, hi, sorry about that. My bar wouldn't work to let me chat to anybody. I know on here, Christian, we've got some people who said that they'd like to share their own stories. So
absolutely. So let's do that. Go for it.
Okay. Just rolling right up to the top. Bear with me 2 seconds, peeps. I think the first one that came through was Jackie. Jackie, do you want to unmute yourself rather than me read, and you tell us your own personal experience? That would be lovely for someone to hear someone else's voice apart from mine all the time.
Yeah, I'd had a break of a relationship and I was just walking home late at night and I was really sort of furious about what this person had done to me. And as I approached this street lamp, it literally seemed to explode. It just blew, the actual lamp blew. And then I went under the next one and that blew. And this couple on the opposite pavement looked one look at me and just ran. I think they thought it was something from the film Carrie or something. Absolutely freaked this couple and just ran as fast as they could. Sort of got out of the way. It's very bizarre though. I've had a similar incident as well. When my dog died, I was really upset and I came back in the house and 2 glass things exploded as I walked in the room. I had so I do seem to affect things sometimes when I'm in. But it's the only 2 times I've
never
done
to upset you, Jackie. I don't want to get on with you. Fabulous. Jackie, I hope you can fill the form in on the sliders page then so that we can have that information.
I'm dropping
if you send us the link where it is, that'd be great. Yeah.
I've just put it in the chat, Jackie. It says forms.gle and it's not because we haven't linked it to the webpage yet, but I'm sending it to everyone. So if you'd all like to just grab that now and copy it, and just, if you can, pass it to any friends who might be interested or post it in public places. I'd like, if possible, to get some international interest. But generally, we're just trying to get the original database ran to about 300 cases, and I would really like to see some more cases come up if that's possible. So thanks for sharing your experience, Jackie. That's fantastic. And if you could fill in the form, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, will do, yeah.
There's a part of it where you share your experience, and then there's lots of questions just to cover the bits you might have missed out. Right, once again, apologies to everyone for my unshaven and haggard look. I was up all last night reading the book, which is available on Amazon. It's called Sliders, I think. Let me have a quick look. I'll grab my phone and show you it so you can see it. Hilary Evans' book on streetlight interference. Now, there is another book he wrote on streetlight interference in 1993. It's not as pretty as Sliders. There's Sliders, if you can see it. Well, there was Sliders until my Kindle. You can get it on Kindle for a couple of quid. The original 1993 book, which has got a lot more information of different type, and Gary M. Rowe's wonderful notes on investigating are on the website, and we're going to try and make those available in the... If I can chat to Morris. Is Morris still here? I'm going to try and put them up to download in the website area under members tonight or tomorrow or whenever Morris has got a moment, or I could do it if need be. So basically you can download for free Hilary's 1993 book as an ASSAP member as long as you promise not to share it outside of the, this is the 1993 book, as long as you promise not to share it outside of ASSAP. So feel free to come and download the guide. I'll tell you when it's up. I'll drop something into the book. If you don't know how to get into the ASSAP members area and you are a paid up member, drop a note to the treasurer or to myself or the secretary and we can all tell you how to get in. It's very easy. There's only one password and one username. That will change with the new website though, where you all have individual accounts. Right, sorry, Caroline, back to you.
The next comment, Christian, would you like to unmute yourself, please, if you finished eating your pizza?
Oh, I did. Yeah, it was a homemade pizza, so it had to be done. So I was like,
What kind of pizza was it, Christian? I think this is of more interest to most of us than street lamps at this time of night.
yes, so actually, the account I've posted here actually is when we attended the ASSAP conference. Myself and Mandy there, we came down to the University of Bath and we stayed in the residency there. And there was this long kind of winding path that kind of had trees on the left side, the building on the right side, and there was a view over the way the Bath is kind of landscaped out. And as we passed under one light, it went out. The next one didn't, and I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit of a shame, really. Then the next one, it did go out. As we were on our way down into the town to get some food and meet up with everyone. And I thought, oh, that was pretty interesting, nonetheless.
Oh, you didn't tell everybody. We could have gone and investigated there and then on the spot.
On the day.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I'm guessing there was no heightened emotions, no weather, adverse effects, nothing that could add to this?
No, it was a pretty kind of normal night. It was overcast. There was no heightened emotions. It was just more excitement for what the conference had in store for the next day. Meeting up with friends and who have an interest in the same kind of topics that we all do, and we all share. That was the excitement, really. But yeah, when the light went out, I was like, oh, I made the mental note of it going out, and then I thought, is it going to happen to the next one? It didn't, but then the one after was like, oh, okay, that's good. Should carry on.
Did the lights come back on?
They did, actually. Yeah, they did. As we passed down much further down the street, and I kept looking back, and they did come back on.
Were they sodium lamps?
Yeah, there were the yellow kind of yellow bulbs, and were kind of in Victorian-esque casing. So the kind of ones that look like they got four sides and a kind of a cap on top. And they kind of had a yellow glow to them.
I am making a mental note on who not to stand next to with lots of software and the next meetings. That's 2 on the list.
Next.
Andy, did you want to unmute yourself rather than me verbate what you've put down?
Hi, yeah. I was there at the time, so Christian pointed that out to me. I was too busy